China didn't just roll out a digital currency. It unleashed a $1.2 trillion financial framework that could rewrite how money moves across borders, quietly, systematically. And while much of the world's still tangled in swift wires, Beijing may have just cut the cord. So what exactly is this new system? China just activated a $1.2 trillion digital Yuan payment architecture that's already settling transactions across 200 countries and regions without touching SWIFT. According to data from the People's Bank of China, the digital yuan has processed over $1.8 trillion yuan, or $250 billion in pilot settlements as of the first quarter of 2025. This isn't a volume play, it's a sovereignty play. By embedding the ECNY into trade corridors, supply chains, and cross-border central bank networks, Beijing is re-engineering the post-dollar era from the inside out. Martin Chorzempa, Senior Fellow at the Peterson Institute, told Bloomberg this represents the first state-run infrastructure that could compete with the SWIFT IBAN-dominated order. In 1944, Bretton Woods crowned the dollar king. In 2025, Beijing is quietly challenging that crown without a single gunshot, but with programmable code and bilateral swap lines. But if this is China's monetary Manhattan Project, then its next move could reveal how deep its global ambitions really run. Since 2015, Beijing has signed over 41 bilateral currency swap agreements, valued at roughly $580 billion, forming a decentralized financial web that allows direct RMB trade bypassing dollar clearing banks. As of late 2024, 38% of China's total trade is now conducted outside of SWIFT, per the Financial Times, largely through the CIPs, or cross-border interbank payment system, which now connects over 400 financial institutions across 110 countries. In practical terms, that means energy shipments from Saudi Arabia to China can now clear in yuan within seconds with no U.S. intermediary banks involved, while SWIFT remains dominant globally, handling about 40 million messages per day. Its grip on emerging market trade has visibly weakened. The silent build-out of a parallel financial architecture by China is one of the most underreported financial revolutions in decades, notes Eswar Prasad, former IMF China division head. But it's what China does next with this alternative pipeline that could turn a workaround into a weapon. The exodus from the dollar isn't ideological, it's structural. In March 2024, Kenya purchased oil from the UAE using Chinese yuan, bypassing the dollar entirely, a move confirmed by President William Ruto himself. Meanwhile, Argentina repaid part of its IMF loan in yuan, not dollars, after exhausting its greenback reserves. According to SWIFT's RMB tracker, yuan's share in global payments surged to 4.6% by February 2025, up from just 1.9% 2 years prior. The acceleration isn't random. It's a direct result of nations hedging against U.S. monetary sanctions and dollar liquidity constraints. Countries aren't ditching the dollar, they're insuring against it, says former World Bank economist Carmen Reinhart. The digital yuan, built with programmable features and no dependence on correspondent banks, gives these nations a plug-and-play alternative that sidesteps Washington's financial gatekeeping. But whether this is decentralization or just re-centralization under Beijing remains an open question, one that may be answered by how many countries sign up next. In a cross-border test between Hong Kong and the UAE, In late 2023, the digital yuan cleared trade invoices in seconds while cutting costs by up to 98%, according to a report by the Bank for International Settlements. Unlike SWIFT, which only transmits messaging instructions, the ECNY system executes actual value transfer in real time, reducing reliance on intermediary clearinghouses and eliminating foreign exchange delays, with SWIFT averaging 1 to 3 business days for cross-border settlements and costing up to $50 per transaction for SMEs. China's alternative offers speed and savings at industrial scale. China's not just building a faster rail line, they're cutting out the ticket booths, said Josh Lipsky, former IMF advisor and director at the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. The system's backbone, CIPS, integrated with the digital yuan, now handles an average of $83 billion in daily transactions. That's no longer experimental, that's operational. But with speed comes surveillance, and who holds the kill switch? That's the question global regulators are starting to ask. In 2024, ASEAN surpassed the EU to become China's largest trading partner, accounting for over $975 billion in two-way trade, according to China's Ministry of Commerce. But beneath the headline is a structural shift. More than 33% of ASEAN-China trade is now settled in non-dollar currencies, with the ECNY rapidly expanding its footprint through regional banks. In Indonesia, QR code-based ECNY wallets are being used by SMEs to bypass delays tied to dollar conversions. In Malaysia, Bank Negara partnered with China's central bank to directly link their fast payment networks, a first for the region. Beijing isn't just exporting goods anymore. It's exporting financial norms, says Alicia Garcia Herrero, chief Asia-Pacific economist at Natixis. And those norms come embedded with dependence. When the rails, rates, and settlement systems all flow through Chinese platforms, regional autonomy starts to erode, even if sovereignty technically remains. But what happens when ASEAN's largest economies become digitally tethered to the yuan? That's where China's influence morphs from transactional to structural. Washington's sanction strategy, once seen as a tool of financial supremacy, is now accelerating the creation of alternative systems. Since Russia's SWIFT suspension in 2022, CIPS transaction volume has increased over 90%, reaching an average of $83 billion per day by early 2025, according to the People's Bank of China. That expansion has paralleled a surge in digital yuan adoption among sanctioned and dollar-strained economies, with cross-border pilot settlements hitting 1.8 trillion yuan, or $250 billion. Bloomberg reports that China expanded bilateral swap lines with Brazil, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia after each faced dollar access constraints in 2023. The more the U.S. turns the dollar into a compliance weapon, the more attractive Beijing's rails become, says Eswar Prasad, former IMF official. Even allies like Indonesia and the UAE have begun testing yuan settlements in oil and agriculture. But here's the contradiction. America's tools were meant to isolate, yet they're incentivizing precisely the systems designed to bypass U.S. control. If isolation breeds innovation, then the next breakthrough may not come from Silicon Valley, but from Shanghai. China's Belt and Road Initiative has poured over $1.1 trillion into infrastructure projects across 148 countries. But what binds that network isn't just railways or ports. It's currency settlement control, and the digital yuan is fast becoming the preferred glue. In Pakistan's Gwadar port, Kenya's Mombasa terminal, and Laos high-speed rail corridor contractors are now being paid in ECNY, with funds routed through digital wallets backed by the PBOC. Bloomberg confirms that at least 13 BRI-linked nations are piloting RMB-based digital settlements, and in some cases, ECNY is being embedded into sovereign debt servicing tools via smart contracts. This isn't just finance. It's programmable alignment, says Alicia Garcia Herrero, chief economist at Natixis. The advantage for China. It doesn't just lend the money. It controls how it's spent, tracked, and potentially reclaimed. But if ECNY locks nations into a closed system, is Belt and Road still infrastructure or digital colonization? By another name, the BRICS bloc, now expanded to include Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the UAE, has quietly transformed into a currency lab. At the 2024 Johannesburg Summit, members agreed to prototype an interlinked payment system using national CBDCs as clearing agents, with China's digital yuan leading in real-world use. According to the Atlantic Council's 2025 CBDC tracker, 4 BRICS central banks are now running cross-border pilots using non-dollar currencies, while SWIFT's own data shows RMB usage overtaking the euro in portions of South-South trade. This is not de-dollarization through destruction. It's fragmentation through innovation, said Josh Lipsky, director of the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomics Center. And as Brazil and Russia push for a shared settlement framework by 2026, the dollar's role as the global medium is under structural revision. But if each region now builds its own financial lane, who governs the intersections, Trump's renewed tariff policy, unveiled in January 2025, proposes a 60% blanket tariff on all Chinese imports, double the rate from his first term. But the Chinese response hasn't followed the old script. Instead of tit-for-tat duties, Beijing accelerated ECNY integration into its export financing, according to a Q1 2025 report by the China Securities Journal. Digital yuan usage in trade settlements rose 19.3% year over year, with state banks offering exporters ECNY trade credits with lower interest than dollar loans. Meanwhile, Hong Kong-based institutions like Bank of China International now offer yuan-denominated letters of credit for ASEAN shipments at up to 40 basis points, cheaper than dollar equivalents, per the South China Morning Post. Tariffs may hit exports, but they're also pushing China to speed up a monetary firewall against U.S. leverage. Notes Mark Sobel, former U.S. Treasury official, in a WSJ interview. The unintended effect. Trump's economic pressure is accelerating the very network designed to insulate China from future pressure. But if tariffs can't contain China and only fuel its alternatives, then what leverage does the U.S. still hold? This isn't a trade dispute anymore. It's a competition to build the next global financial nervous system. The dollar isn't vanishing, but its role as the world's gatekeeper is being reprogrammed in real time. While the West debates tariffs, China's laying programmable rails, embedding them in infrastructure deals, regional trade pacts, and even digital wallets offered through Belt and Road banks. And it's not just about payment. It's about surveillance, programmable disbursement, and geopolitical control embedded directly into financial flows. A system where money moves only if the algorithm and the issuer allows it. So here's the question you need to ask. If Beijing controls the rails, the rules, and the routes, what happens when the next crisis hits and the world needs liquidity, but not from Washington? Because China's not just preparing for the next financial war, it's preparing to win it before it even starts. Because when the next global crisis hits and the liquidity lifeline doesn't come from Washington, will the world be ready to accept Beijing's terms instead? We're glad you're enjoying this video. Please like and subscribe